and we are back for episode 5 of ClubCast, the official Diamond Club podcast. There's a lot of things that happened last week while we were recording the episode. We touched on a couple things like Ohtani. We're going to get into more of that today. We also got our thoughts on Steven Strasburg retiring quite early. We're also going to revisit the National League MVP race just because a lot has changed since when we last discussed that a couple episodes ago. But that's what happens in the MLB season. Things change weekly. But just to get straight into it, I would say before we talk about Ohtani, speaking of injuries, Steven Strasburg retired. It was rumored by a couple Nationals beat writers, then Bob Nightingale, typically in his Twitter fashion, he breaks the story. And I'm interested because, you're a Phillies fan. You've seen this guy pretty much. He played his entire career in the Nationals. He's been one of the most hyped prospects probably ever, at least as a pitcher. That was a guy that you always heard his name, like especially early on, like 2000, like 10 is when he was around that time. So I'm interested to see what you think as a Phillies fan, that he ended up retiring only, I believe, like, what was it, three years into his new contract.
Yeah. It's I mean, as a Phillies fan, like you said, it's probably good to see, but Strasburg, he's just good for baseball. Like you said, he's one of the best most hyped prospect, if not the most hyped prospect ever. He's just a good guy to watch, fun guy. He works hard, man. He's not no problems. It just sucks. He's been stuck with that injury bug his whole career. You can even see from 2018 to 2023, he had a throwing shoulder injury, nerve impingement, 2 hand injuries, another throwing shoulder injury, a neck injury, a rib injury, and another shoulder injury.
Yeah.
Within that 5-year span. So it doesn't surprise me. Honestly, it doesn't surprise me. He did just get that big deal, like you said. But it sucks for somebody with such high talent and such drive that even I know you remember when they shut him down when they were going towards the playoffs and all this stuff, and he was having these great years, and everybody's like, "Yo, what the hell are they doing?" It still didn't work. You see, like he still is out of the league early, which he's 35 now, but you see Verlander pitching into his 40s, you see Scherzer pitching into his 40s. That's the kind of caliber Strasburg was. So as a Phillies fan, it's good that we don't have to compete against him, just like Freddie. But it's sad to see another guy that you're not going to get to watch anymore.
Immediately when it was announced that he was retiring, because I've already known his injury history. I mean, the entire league does. If you watch baseball and you know his name, if you were to describe his career, it's probably the definition of what if. Because if he stayed healthy, the amount of hype that when he was healthy, he lived up to it, and he definitely could have been that franchise icon. He still is for the Nationals. We'll get into what he did in 2019 in a minute, but you brought up the good point of early in his career when he had Tommy John surgery and the Nationals made the playoffs that year in 2012, the year after he was recovering.
Mm-hmm.
And they shut him down because they set a hard innings limit, and they couldn't have gotten more scrutinized for that decision, because not only did they end up blowing the division's series lead to the Cardinals, he was a guy that they definitely could have used in that series. And I go back and forth trying to hold on to, like, all right, let's keep calm with this guy. Let's take it slow, work him back up because we want him for the long haul. Because in Strasburg case, like you said, it proved that it didn't help. I mean, I can see why they wanted to do it. They're trying to get him for when it matters in October, and they certainly did that a couple years. But like for my case, like the way I see where the Dodgers handle Kershaw stuff, where he had an injury this year that he said I think it was like something in his shoulder, and he said, I'm fine, I could still pitch through it. Dodgers said, no, we're shutting you down for a month. And I was like, it's kind of a good thing that the Dodgers are a really good team because I feel like they kind of have the right to say, we're looking long haul and like we're going this way. But I feel like Kershaw's missing more opportunities to pad his Hall of Fame career.
Mhm.
If he went to Texas, I'm pretty sure he would be like they would let him do whatever he wanted. If he said he wanted to pitch 32 games, he would pitch 32 games no matter what. I just think it's the Dodgers are really conservative, similar to the Nationals in regards to injury prone pitchers. Um, and that's just something a lot of franchises do now. So it's not just the Nationals, but in the case of Steven Strasburg, it just seems like his body just didn't have it in him anymore. And like you mentioned, he's 35. I mean, to make it that to just that in your career at like that age, that's a accomplishment in itself. But it's definitely I would say it's a big what if because he could have been one of the better right-handed pitchers, at least of our generation. And now I kind of think, unless you're a hardcore Nationals fan, like in the next like 20 years, he would kind of be like maybe an afterthought.
Mhm.
Um, but that stuff just like that just happens. But um, speaking of 2019, when he's fully healthy, that's what he does. He was dominant that entire postseason run, and I saw it firsthand. You saw it. He carried them all the way to the World Series.
Right.
That's the type of pitcher he was when he was fully healthy, and then that probably could have been the final straw for his body because it was the most innings he pitched I think in a whole collective season with the regular season and the postseason. So, um, do you think the Nationals regret letting him go all out in that postseason?
Bro, you know what I'm gonna say. Flags fly forever. But like you never know. You never know because he could have went out there and pitched all these innings and came back next year and been fine. I know there's a track record of. I mean, I'm saying it this year with the Phillies, pitchers coming off the long postseason runs, things come back. They're slower. They're getting nagging injuries, not necessarily like big blowout shoulders or necks or things like that. But I mean, they saw their spot. I mean, with 2019, he's in his prime. You know what I mean? Like you got to go win something at some point. I just think it's tough to decide when, because like you said, I think the Dodgers case is a little bit different. They love Kershaw, and I don't know as much as you do, obviously, about his future. But you would think a guy at that age that's like, hey, I'm just gonna pitch through it. They'd just be like, hey, like do whatever you want. You're like a top 5 lefty ever. Like,
Yeah.
but I don't know. You don't know. Are they expecting him to pitch another 2 years? Like I don't know what they're thinking. I think if I'm the Nationals, I agree with what they did, but hindsight's 2020.
Yeah. And like I said, just going off of like 2020 again, he went, I think he pitched, 36 innings in the postseason. He went 5-0, 1.98 ERA, just pretty much utter dominance.
Yeah.
The only team that probably gave him a run for his money was the Dodgers in that NLDS, which that was the only series that they played that, besides the World Series, that went the full length, 5 games and then 7 games in the World Series. And, he was nails in that World Series. And I think Nationals fans and then the front office, they may say, I wish Strasburg could have played. And maybe even Strasburg himself, he probably wishes his career could have been different or longer. But at the end of the day, he gets to say he was a World Series champion. He's literally built into that franchise forever now because he is on their one World Series win that they have. And it was recent enough that those guys like us will remember, the fans will remember, and everything like that. Because I don't think you're really going to see many postseasons from a pitcher like that anytime soon, just because I don't think pitchers are built that way anymore to go deep into games and to pitch that many innings. It's a lot more matchup based and mixing it up. I've been like thinking about what the Dodgers are going to do, or what even what the Phillies are going to do. Besides their 2 frontline starters, like even the Dodgers, like they maybe only want Kershaw and Urias to go through the order twice, and then that fifth inning comes around, depending on maybe if they gave up a couple of hits, they're going straight to the bullpen or they're doing bullpen games. That's the future of baseball. So we definitely should appreciate what Strasburg did for the Nationals. It sucks that he had to retire. The Nationals are on the hook for that salary still, and fortunately for them, because I feel like besides the no hitter that they suffered against Diamond Club boy Michael Lorenzen,
Sir.
they've actually had a really good second half, and a lot of their young pieces are starting to finally click. They got a better record than the Padres, or I think they're same, but they're above them because they've won the season series against them. So it's looking good for the Nationals in the future, at least. But losing Strasburg is definitely a big bite to blow. But other than that, moving on, we'll go with another injury. Something that can go, something that is going to shake up not much the rest of this year, but it's going to shake up the winter and the off season for the Major League Baseball and probably sports in general, because wherever this guy goes, it's going to be covered by every major sports network. So obviously, I'm talking about Shohei Ohtani. We talked about it a little bit last episode. He does have it seems to be that it's not a full tear from what I've read. It's a partial tear where it obviously still causing him pain. But one of the things that a lot of people are saying is that there's been pitchers in the past that have pitched with partially torn UCLs and they've been fine. And they've pitched a couple years and it hasn't really lingered back to them. But I definitely think no matter what this type of injury it is, it definitely affects his outlook for free agency. And I'm curious to see how much money did you think he lose? And do you think teams actually cared, or do they just want the player and the name to be on their jersey?
I think definitely he loses money. But I'll play the devil's advocate. I don't think it's that big a deal. Honestly, it's a big deal because it's Shohei Ohtani, like the most polarizing athlete since like Tatis came into the league or something like that. But like you said, I don't think it's a thing where he never pitches again. And even if he doesn't pitch again, this motherfucker is one of the best, is a top 3 hitter in the league, like undeniably. Probably still, 100 million. That's probably what he's going to get off. I think it's just a thing of next year you probably won't get him to pitch. But again, it depends, man. It depends where he goes. There's so many different, avenues that could happen. If he goes to contender and, halfway through the year they're fighting for a playoff spot, like I don't know what teams I have written down, that the Yankees, the Mets, somebody like that, and they need to get into the playoffs, he might pitch. Like he might pitch next year, especially if it's not a full tear, like you said. I don't know. I just think it's going to be a big deal in terms of like missing out on that pitcher Ohtani, but hitter Ohtani is hitter Ohtani. Like I don't think it's going to matter as much to the team that gets him as it will the other teams that don't get him, because now who's your top starter? Yeah. I think you have Aaron Nola, and like that, there's not much else there. You know what I mean? I think it's going to affect the market more than it affects Ohtani, I think.
Yeah. I would say before I give you my response, what do you think? A lot of people said before the injury and everything, they said that he was going to be like the first $600 million player. Do you think that was still on the table before the injury? And then what contract, if you were a GM with unlimited amount of money, what would you give Ohtani if you didn't know about the injury?
If I didn't know about the injury, it's an interesting question. I think I've always been more on the boat of like the Dodgers, of the high AAV, shorter years kind of thing. I would rather give him like 4 or 5 for like 250, something like that, than give him 10 for 600 or like 15 for 600, something like that. I think he could still get like one of those big mega deals. 600 million is a lot, but
Yeah.
it's a lot of revenue. You know what I mean? Like, people don't understand that side of the business. That's a big thing that, you know, you're from this area. You know how stupid Philly is sometimes. People don't understand that the 300 million that we paid Bryce Harper probably got made up in like 2 years between like jersey sales, merch, like all that kind of stuff. So they could still pay him. They could still pay Ohtani a lot of money. I don't know. I just don't think I would.
Yeah. So, to go back to my question, Ohtani, I feel like his market was only before injury, wasn't really going to affect the market for the offseason as much as people were making it out to be. Because realistically, say if he did get 600 million, there's only like 3 teams that can afford that type of contract. And I'm already going to take one of those teams out. I don't think the Mets are probably going to be in on him. I think the Mets aren't going to be in on him anymore now because of the injury as well. But the injury shakes things up now because it really just depends on what Ohtani wants to do. Does he want the security and lose a good chunk of money and sign a long-term deal just to get that assurance that he's going to be on a team for 10 years, no matter what happens? Or does he take a shorter-term high AAV deal like you mentioned, but with a shit ton of opt-outs? Say he signs a 4-year deal, he has an opt-out after every single year. You put that type of contract in consideration, I don't care what team you are, every team can afford that type of deal. You can afford $45 million for one guy. It is a lot for one guy, but every team can do it. They can make space on their payroll. Not every team would do it, but a lot more teams. You're looking from 3 teams to maybe like 15 or 16 teams that could realistically put in a bid if it was a shorter term deal like that. Before I thought I've heard from a bunch of guys that I work with the Dodgers beat and the guys they talk to, and they really said that an Angels beat writer even said it's really just down to the 2 LA teams because that's where he prefers to play because it's close to the Japanese market, and he's already familiar with the town and everything. As a Dodgers fan, I don't think they're really going to be in on him as heavy as now because they already have a lot of injuries to worry about with their pitchers' arms, and they don't need another one. And I don't know if I'm willing to give him a lot of money because you're essentially getting a DH for a year and a half and then hoping he comes back. And then the injury is like it's kind of a big deal because say he does have to get surgery, that would be his second Tommy John surgery in 5 years. And pitchers that get 1 Tommy John surgery, that's a big road to recovery. And then hoping that you get to pitch at the same level. Getting 2, it hasn't really boded well for anybody. And if there's anyone that can beat the odds and come back stronger, it probably is Ohtani just because of the grit that he has and his mentality. He wants to be the best. He wants to be the best. That's the whole thing about him. And everyone that's close to him, because he doesn't talk much, but they just say he really wants his legacy and all that to be bigger than him. So he's playing to be that unicorn of a player, and being able to pitch and hit. So that does deteriorate his value as a free agent if he can't do one or the other, because essentially you're either getting a 2-way player or you're getting a DH, and hopefully maybe if he doesn't pitch again, he finds a way to field either at first base or the outfield. So that definitely affects his contract.
Yeah.
Before the injury, I thought he was going to get, I think some team was going to throw stupid money at him, but I don't know if he would necessarily take that money because I don't think money is really about what he wants. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be something that he considers, but I think at the end of the day, he's going to want to be somewhere that he can win. Yeah. And that's going to go into his the off season. But now that he has that injury, there's going to be a lot more fringe teams that may be interested in him, and that kind of may work out in his favor. Now he has more options to choose from. You could get a team like the Braves, who don't usually spend big. You can get a team like the Cubs, who have a lot of Japanese players throughout their history in like the recent 20 years. So it's not just going to be a battle between the big market teams. So that's something to look forward to as we get closer to the offseason and get a decision on what he's going to do with his arm.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you saying that part of the money not being as big a thing, because I agree with that. I think that he's, like you said, he's more of a legacy guy. He's like, hey, I want to go be the best. I want to go win. I want to go do this. I want to go do that. Not like, hey, I want to go make this. I want to go, get this big deal. I mean, I've listened, like you said, he doesn't talk much. I've listened to what he says, and he doesn't really ever even talk about his contract. Like, he knows he's about to get fucking $500 million, but he doesn't care. Like, I wanted to pitch this to you. What do you think of him in like that shorter range thing, like 3 years, 150 with an opt out after, every year, saying, hey, bet on me to hit and I'll bet on myself to pitch, year 2, year 3. Like you said, now you open up 10, 12 more teams. You don't necessarily need to have a team that can go win next year if you have an opt out after year 1, if you have an opt out after year 2. Honestly, that could be an option for him depending on how severe his elbow is.
Yeah, I definitely like the shorter term deal better. And say nothing's really seriously wrong with the elbow. Maybe he can rehab it, get it semi back to strength. That rarely happens where you get fully back without doing surgery, so I'm still wary about it. But if, say, everything's fine, I'm completely fine with the Dodgers throwing him a boatload of money for like 3 years, because they've tried to do it before. The big thing is they try to do it with Bryce Harper, and he wanted a longer term deal. I think Shohei would probably trade long term for success and being on a playoff team and winning. I was there. I was tweeting on the socials at the Phillies Angels game. He still had, I think he had 2 hits that game, and I feel like he's always usually smiling, but I feel like since the injury and since the Angels have taken a downward spiral, I don't really see him in the dugout as much anymore. Like, he's not usually like wandering around with all the teammates and everything. He's probably like just fed up with the Angels. I honestly was like, why does he even want to play? He's already got the MVP wrapped up. He might as well just start resting now. But like I said before, I just don't think that's in his mentality. I'm interested to see what you think about this, and this is what I was kind of contemplating in my head. I think if this benefits anybody, this injury, it benefits the Angels the most. And I think because the Angels have already had him for 6 years, they've already dealt with him being injured before with Tommy John, and they're probably the most comfortable franchise letting him do the two-way playing. Because I think if he went somewhere else, especially after this year where his body seemed to be getting fatigued, teams like the Dodgers, they will set inning limits on you, and they will make sure that you're ready for October compared to the regular season. And I don't think this isn't anything against Shohei, but I don't think he would be okay with that. I think from everything I've been reading about and hearing about from these LA columnist writers is that Shohei pretty much runs the show in Anaheim. And they even asked him, they were like about his injury or something. And they were like, all right, do you want to do an MRI? And he was like, no.
Yeah,
He's like, I don't want to do an MRI. And I was like, it's kind of weird. Usually if the team recommends an MRI, you usually get the MRI. But because he's about to be a free agent, I assume he probably just didn't want it out there like that. Or maybe he just didn't want to break the bad news and get it out there publicly and everyone know about it,
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like the Angels, I know they just waived a bunch of guys. Their farm system's pretty much depleted. It wasn't really good when pre-deadline. And then they traded away whatever talent they possibly had. And then you still have Trout on the team. Does Shohei end up just staying in Anaheim?
Dude, it's that I never thought of that concept until you said it, but it makes sense. Like it's a really comfortable environment. I think, like you said, he knows what he can and can't do. He knows how to use him, knows how to recover with him, knows how to treat his injuries. Um, Familiar city, like you said earlier. I think that gives him an advantage, but like you said, man, it feels like he just doesn't have fun. It's funny that you brought that up because I was watching the game and you were there, so you couldn't see it, but they showed him, I think it was his third at bat after we scored all the runs, and he goes down 0-2, and then they just show him. He's just like staring off. When do you ever see Ohtani not smiling or smirking or doing something? It was the same day they DFA or waived 5 guys.
Yeah.
They're getting blown out. They can't win any games after they went all in on, hey, we can, make a push after the trade deadline. Like you said, I think it helps, but it's so much. I think it's whatever team makes him feel most comfortable, and we'll let him do, like you said, we'll let him do what he wants.
Yeah, I definitely think it helps the Angels' case because they definitely want to keep him.
Yeah.
They would have traded him if they didn't want to keep him. And then they traded for all these guys in hopes to make a playoff push to keep him. I told you even before, I said, hey, if the Angels make the playoffs, I think he's just going to stay there. Now I'm like still 50-50 because I still think his arm could have fell off. And I think some team is going to throw at him buckets of money. And then he may just end up taking that deal. And leaving just to get the opportunity to leave the Angels. Like if he's getting the years and the money, then he's just going to take that. It could even be like a 500 team. I think any situation is better than playing for the Angels because they have so many issues right now, whether it's ownership, front office, player development, whoever's their what's the health and conditioning coach? I don't know, the strength team. They need to get fired because it seems like everybody's breaking over there. I mean, they've wasted 2 superstars' careers so far, and it looks like Mike Trout's pretty much just stuck there for the rest of his career because I don't imagine anybody's going to want to eat as good as he can be when he's healthy. I don't imagine people are going to want to eat $35 million a year for the next like 8 seasons he still has left. Yeah, so I'm interested in the off season, especially as we get closer, especially when we hear about what Ohtani's going to do, because that's definitely going to be a big story this upcoming off season.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously going to headline it. It all depends on. I agree with you. I think there could be just some random team that's just like, let's make our franchise. Let's just get our guy and just pay him and build around him. But like you said, I think it has to be a fringe team. It can't be a bad team.
I'm putting it out there. I think the Cubs get him. That's what
I wrote the Cubs down. They were one. So obviously I put Dodgers, Mets, Yankees, like Angels, and then I put the Mariners and the Cubs. I think those are 2 like fringe teams. Mariners are on the coast. They're playing really exciting baseball. That'd be hella fun to see Ohtani out there. Not the biggest market. I mean, it'd be becoming a bigger market.
You could make it a bigger market,
right? Yeah. But yeah, I like Mariners and the Cubs. I think those could be some sleeper options.
Yeah. Yeah. Keeping it on the line of injuries, there seems to be a very big problem in baseball. And I think it's been accelerated since probably 2018-19. And that is the same injury that Ohtani is dealing with right now. And that is the UCL, the elbow injury that is pretty much destroying pitchers' elbows throughout the whether it's minor leagues, major leagues. It seems to be a big problem that a lot of guys are going through. You see guys that are either in college, they end up getting the surgery done. You see guys in the minor leagues as soon as they're drafted, they pitch like Kumar Rocker. He pitched all that through Vanderbilt, so many innings there, and then he goes to he gets drafted by the Mets, doesn't go to the Mets, goes to the Rangers, and he ends up getting Tommy John surgery this year. It's a common theme that a lot of teams are seeing right now, and that's these young arms um, end up just their elbows just getting blown out, and then they end up needing to get Tommy John surgery. So it's definitely a big problem. Is there any like actual cause that we can point to?
I think there's a couple different causes. Probably none directly. I think it's just a culmination of a lot of things. I think one thing is we'll start with the training. I think all the new tech, I mean, the emphasis on analytics, all this kind of stuff that's come out in the last, like you said, 3 or 4 years, I think it's overemphasizing. It's tough. I would say it's overemphasizing analytics and spin rate and things like that, but that is how you make your living. I just think the body's not built to do that 100 times a game. You know what I mean? A lot of times you're seeing these guys, you know, like you said, college guys pitching, 200 innings. It's like that doesn't seem like a
Doesn't
good
happen.
idea
Yeah.
when you're 18, 19, 20 years old. I think definitely the emphasis on analytics is accelerating injuries. I think the other thing is the training. So young nowadays. You see these kids. We coached in the summer. These kids are 12 years old throwing sliders, curveballs. It's like, how do you not expect your elbow to be blown out by the time you're 20? I think it's almost a new pandemic in the sport of baseball. It's the elbow injury. It's you got to find that gray area of I want to be super good, but I want to be able to pitch for a long amount of time. Something we've seen with Strasburg. He never had a ERA over 3.7 or something, and even in all of his years. And he was like, "Screw it, I'm gonna go be as good as I can for as long as I can pitch." But then you
Yeah.
have guys like our boy Rich Hill who said, "Screw it, I'm gonna throw 80 miles an hour and pitch for 30 years." Like
Yeah.
it's kind of the mindset, I think, is another thing that affects them a lot. But I think it's just the body's not built for max effort 100 times a game.
Yeah.
That's just what you're seeing with these guys nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, I tried to find some things around the internet, kind of like pointing to what's wrong and like some numbers behind everything. So in terms of Tommy John surgery, a pitcher is 95% more likely to get the surgery than a position player. It's pretty rare that we see a position player get it. We have seen some big names have it in recent years. You experienced it with Harper. I experienced it with Corey Seager a
Right.
couple years
Yep.
ago. So it can happen. It's just not as common.
Yep.
Um, there's a couple reasons, but I'm gonna go with the biggest one. The reason why we've seen so many big names get it recently, and I think you kind of have to mention it. And I just think it's the 2020 COVID season. So a lot of things. They started spring training. They were getting ramped up. They were getting prepared for the regular season. Just because when spring training ends doesn't mean that pitchers are still getting worked up. Not often do you see a pitcher right after spring training go 9 shutout innings or something like that. They usually still go around, all right, opening day, if my guy gave me 5 innings or 6 innings, that's a good start. I'm glad I got that in April. And then they work their way. You'll start seeing them go deeper and deeper into ball games. And then once you get to August, September, guys like that are aces, they've been pitching 5-6 innings in the early parts of the years. Now they're working their way to go in like 7, 8, 9 innings if they can. In 2020, they didn't have the luxury of doing that. The season stopped abruptly. They weren't allowed to go to the complexes or anything until the MLB said that it was okay. A lot of these guys had to do the training on their own. And then they come back during July playing a 60-game season in a short amount of time. And we're talking about more playoff teams, so more opportunity to win. So these guys had to crank it up to 110% in a matter of a couple weeks. And I've already seen it affect one guy on my team, and that's Walker Buehler.
Yeah.
And that 2020 playoff, that in 2020 season, he was okay. He had like a 3 ERA. You don't really look at the stats in the regular season. It was just too short of a sample size. That postseason, he pitched the most innings in a postseason he's ever pitched. It was the last time I've seen Bueller dot over 100 miles per hour consistently. And then you go to 2021, he pitches the most innings of his career. And then in 2022, because of that, needs Tommy John. Like, he looked awful from the start of that season just because of how deep they went in 2020 and then 2021. Like, there is some fingers to be pointed at the 2020 season. And that's also when we've seen a huge spike. There was a bunch of stuff. I saw Bob Nightingale a couple of years ago wrote an article about the same thing, saying that the 2020 season has seen, if you go from that to now, has seen a huge spike of like around 60% in elbow surgeries or elbow injuries. And a lot of people pointed to the 2020 year. Another thing is just, I tried to find some type of data for it, and that was with analytics are a big part of the game and analyzing every pitch and everything. Um, and I was trying to find something correlating with spin rate because I feel like spin rate has been going up extremely high these past like 2-3 years. But there wasn't really anything that showed there was any correlation at all. Trying to get higher spin rate. But the guys that usually have higher spin rate, they're usually throwing gas. So I don't know if it's God given talent or they're just training their bodies so hard, like you said, to go 110% with every single pitch. So I guess you could try to point at just those two things if I had to guess. Other than that, a lot of these guys are coming up extremely young now. Like, I remember back then, it was pretty rare to see a player, especially a pitcher, come up around his 20-year-old season, like 20 years old. Now that just seems extremely common. Like, these guys they're not even supposed to come. They're just expected to come up. You're seeing guys that go in college, and then like, what are we looking with Paul Skeens next year? Like, he may even be on the roster at some point next year for the Pittsburgh because of the college experience. So the game's getting younger, and I think because they're not working their bodies to get up to that level, that it's kind of biting them in the back, even though they are pitching at a high level. You do have to train your body. Like, it doesn't happen overnight. Like, it takes time. It could take years.
Yeah, it's the pandemic season is a really interesting thing. I never thought of it that way, but you're right. It's like you're ramping up for a season, like, oh, hey, I'm normal job going into it, and then it's like, hey, we're not going to play till halfway through the season, and then when you come back, they're all going to be playoff implication games. Like,
Yeah.
that's like the hardest thing to do. Like you said, you're not even ramping up to 100 at that point. You're ramping up to 110, 120 because you need to be the best you can be.
Yeah.
That's probably a big thing. I think spin rate, man. I like how you touched on it. We're gonna introduce a little segment of Jake Huber's pitching lessons because I have a baseball right here. When these guys are trying to spin the ball real hard, you're squeezing real hard down on those laces, and that's when you get that pressure here in your elbow.
Tension. Yeah.
Right, that's the biggest thing. So spin rate, when you're ripping down on them laces to get that ball to spin, that's what's pushing on your elbow so much. So the max effort and the drive to try to get that spin rate up, I think, is really becoming a big thing because you watch Momentum, you watch Trevor Bauer. These guys are just sitting in practice doing full max effort pull downs and all this shit. I think all the things that we kind of mentioned it's just a cumulative problem that you think would be fixed. I mean, like we said, there's a lot of tech for building somebody up, but there's a lot of tech for helping someone too. Like, you would think that the strength and conditioning coaches, the medicine, the doctors, all that kind of stuff would be able to prevent things like this. But I think it's just too new of a thing. I like you said earlier, it's only been the last few years that it's really, really been a problem. I think that in the next few years we probably see a little bit more of like a recovery thing because we've seen it with Harper. we'll probably see it with Ohtani. These guys coming back pretty quick. Obviously, Harper's a position player, but I think there's going to be it's a more ready, road for recovery from a UCL injury soon.
Yeah. I also just think it just depends on the player. And like you said, Harper, he's like just an athlete, like peak physical fitness.
Right.
And he beat all odds to come back earlier than what everybody thought he was going to be. Um, a lot of guys could have something wrong with their elbow and not know about it. Like you don't know about it until you say something, and then the teams take a look and they're like, "Oh, shit, there's a tear." Like that's the only way. And then a lot of teams, and it even happened. You've probably seen me like and retweet it on Twitter. Is that a lot of teams, if their pitchers have like a partially torn UCL, they're like, well, what do you want to do with it? Like, you can still pitch through it. Like, it may not be comfortable. You may not be 100% effective, but you can do it. And that's what the Dodgers did with Tony Gonsolin. They said that he had an MRI in June, like early June. Mm-hmm. And they said, yeah, partially torn. Last year at the end of the season, he had forearm tightness. Forearm tightness usually leads to the elbow shit.
Right.
And that's what happens this year. The doctors looked at him. They said, look, you have partially torn UCL. You can pitch through it, though. And obviously, a player is not going to want to say, yeah, I want to do the surgery that's going to make me be out for a year and a half. And he went with the latter. He said, you know what, I'm gonna pitch through it. And we saw what happened. He had so many shaky starts, coupled with a couple good ones, but most of them, he gave up like 10 runs to the Marlins, in like a start before he finally went on the IL. I don't know if teams they have their players' best interests in heart, because at the end of the day, they're looking to get the team over the hump. So if the player says, "Hey, I'm good to go," they're gonna be like, "All right, cool, good, go out there." And then if your arm falls off, then we'll address it. But I'm interested to just see what the technology to show how and to improve yourself has gotten so exponentially better. It's definitely got to start getting better with, all right, we've already seen it. Like you said, you mentioned Trevor Bauer's videos. The one thing he said is every pitcher and every athlete is different. You have to know your body, and that doesn't mean all right, I know my limits. You need to know, or they know what they can get to, but they also need to set limits for themselves.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to see, because we've already seen a lot of guys that work with momentum or around there, drive line and all that. They're starting to get MLB jobs from these franchises, because they're like, all right, how do we get the most out of our players, but how do we also take care of them as well? So that's the only way it's going to stop.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is behind the scenes. I don't think, like you said, I think the limit thing is huge, because no professional athlete's going to be like, hey, I don't want to play. I want to go have surgery. Nobody's going to do that. But behind the scenes, one of the things, I don't care if you like Trevor Bauer or not, one of the things he does well is prepare. He has days where, 2 days before his start, he won't throw, because he knows his body's not ready. That's the kind of things that these guys need to start doing. I think that's probably where you see the improvement more so, that side of the technology, more so than innings limits, things like that. But yeah, something's gotta change, because we can't keep taking out our best players in baseball every year.
And that's entirely true. Nothing is more annoying than seeing a very young pitcher that has a lot of potential, or an ace like someone like Jacob deGrom or anyone else getting that surgery and ruining their whole year. Because I'm sure the Texas Rangers would gladly take deGrom back right now. But now let's get to the nitty gritty. Let's get out of the injury talk and move on to two topics that kind of revolve around similar areas. So the first thing we're going to talk about, we talked about it a couple weeks ago. It shows just how much the race can change in just over a little under a month. And that is the NL MVP race now. Same four names are involved, and I think it'll probably be those four names in the top four when voting comes around in October, November. Obviously, at the time we were arguing, at least I was petitioning for Freddie Freeman. I thought he still is having a really good season. He's still going to probably break the Dodgers franchise record for doubles. He only needs I think one or two more. He'll likely hit 60 doubles, which hasn't been done since the 1930s. You got Matt Olson, who, he's got the power in that deep Rays lineup. Doesn't hit for high average, but is a steady force, plays every day. He's definitely another name that's in there as well. But I think the biggest surprise is we've seen Mookie Betts finally take over, at least in some Vegas odd books, that he is the favorite. Slim. It's very slim. It goes back and forth. Last week it had Mookie at -160. Today it has, I think, Ronald at -140. So it just shows how frequently this stuff changes. But it looks like as we enter September, we're recording this on August 31st, last day. We got one more month of the MLB season. I'm going to say it's definitely going to be down to Acuna Jr. versus Mookie Betts. I'm interested to say, who do you think wins the MVP right now? And then who do you think is going to win it probably at the end of the season?
Honestly, I think my answer might be the same for both. It all depends on how the MLB voters are, what they look at. My biggest thing is OPS, in my opinion. I think that's the best stat for a hitter. It takes into account your on base percentage, your slugging, which is a big thing for me too. And Mookie Betts is 6'11" slugging from a top 2 defender in the league. Like that, how can you argue with that? He's got a whole point of WAR ahead of Ronald Acuna, 15 more RBIs, 7 more homers, 50 points higher slugging. His OBP 6 points lower. That's why I look at OPS, because everybody's OBP is going to be around the same. I just think Mookie Betts, man, he just plays the game right. Acuna's phenomenal. It's not a hate on Acuna. It's probably a little biased. I don't care. I don't like the Braves. Mookie Betts is one of the funnest players to watch in baseball defensively, and he is back to 2018, where he's just smashing the baseball again. He's been on a hot streak. The Braves have a tough schedule going into last month. They play the Phillies 10 times. So I know that will probably be a big thing. Acuna will probably get 15 more home runs off those games alone. But yeah, man, I think Mookie, right now, I'd give it to Mookie. It's going to be real close, though. It's real close. It's fun to see a race this close again, but it's going to be close.
Yeah. It's interesting because one thing that is the same in compared from this conversation to the one we had a couple episodes ago is that the one constant is it's insert name versus Acuna, because Acuna has been the front runner for every month up until probably now. Freddie gave him a run for his money a couple weeks ago, and now Mookie Betts, after extremely hot August, where just in the month of August alone, Betts hit when I took these notes yesterday, on August 30th, he was batting .452 for the month, had 47 hits, 9 home runs, 26 RBIs, and then 31 runs scored. Likely probably going to win Player of the Month. He won Player of the Week last week, where he batted over 600, which is just like MLB The Show type numbers.
Yeah, I saw that as well.
That month of August alone has jumped him to a lot of people's minds now as being the MVP frontrunner. And we already saw Vegas change the odds that week. A lot of MLB writers, MLB network personalities, they all said, if I had my vote today, I would probably give it to Mookie Betts. And before I'm going to go on a homer rant for Betts, I do want to put in my reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
I think if the season ended right now, I still think Acuna would probably barely, and I mean barely win.
Yeah.
And I think it's because it depends on what voter is voting, because there's going to be that guy that looks for the oddity stats.
Right.
And both of these guys can get them. And I'll go over Betts one when I talk about him. But for Acuna, he can be the first player ever to have 70 stolen bases and over 30 home runs, which that is an accomplishment in itself. I know stolen bases kind of mean less now because the bases are bigger, less pickoffs, and then that just since the bases are bigger, that means it's less distance from each base. So he's also been caught the most, which just means he's been the most aggressive out of anybody, which I know. I mean, like, give him credit. You know, the Braves, they're a first and second inning team. They attack. He usually gets on base. He steals. And then most of the time he ends up scoring with the guys that hit behind him. So I'll give him that because I do think that is a unique thing to have on your player card. Like that's definitely going to be on his Topps 2023 or 2024 baseball card. And it looks like he's likely going to get to that point. Because I think he has like 29, or he may have just hit the 30 home run. Yeah. And he just got over 60 stolen bases. So we got a whole month to play. He's definitely going to get to 70, and he's definitely probably going to hit 10 more home runs. So that'll be cool in its own right. Another thing, I think there's some consideration to say when I'm a player, I put up these stats, and I played every single game. He's going to play 162 games. He's not the only guy on that Braves team that's going to play probably the entire season. Matt Olson's played every single game. I think Ozzie Albies has played almost every single game, and Austin Riley have played every single game. That's usually unheard of. Usually you get like one Iron Man on the team that plays either every game or a majority of the games. The Braves, they have like 5. But to put up the stats that Acuna is putting up, to play every single day, like you're getting 4 or 5 at bats these games, that's pretty impressive to still bat well over 300, have good power, speed. His defensive metrics, they look awful, but I think it's just because instead of letting a play just go away, like, all right, let him get the double. No, he tries to make the all-star play, and sometimes it blows up in his face. He's a good outfielder. He's got a good arm. I know he can run good out there. He doesn't have the versatility that Betts has, but it's something that I would give him a plus for. And I think because he's led almost all year, I think a lot of voters are still going to probably give him the vote, like if for right now in August as we enter September. But a lot can change in a month. And when it comes to Betts, you know, Betts has only had one bad month. There's only been 1 month that he batted under 250, and that was April. And there's only been 1 month where he batted under 300, and I think that was May. Every single month since then, it's been slowly increasing. I think he batted 310 in June, a little bit higher in July, and then in August, he pretty much blew it off the roof and is finally starting to hit for average again. You could argue this is probably the best season of Mookie Betts' career because when you look at his 2018 MVP numbers, which was statistically one of the better seasons of an MLB and like for anybody like in the career. And I think he was unanimous that year, winning MVP. He's not as fast as he once was. I mean, that just happens with age. Like Mookie's in his 30s now. He's not going to steal as many bases every year. And I don't think it really needs to be a part of his game anymore because he's changed now. Now he can hit over 40 home runs, it seems. I think what's cool to compare both these players is that they're both leadoff hitters.
Yeah.
And they're putting up these types of stats. I don't care. Like, you can go back and forth with Acuna and Mookie. Like, the fact that these guys are putting up these power numbers from the one hole is crazy. That was just like, I thought when Jock Peterson, you like Kyle Schwarber's the leadoff hitter, and they're putting up power. Well, these two guys, they're just the like 5-tool players going all out. I think what's going to separate Betts as we move forward is two things. And the first one is like how I mentioned before, the versatility. The fact that Betts can play right field, second base, and shortstop automatically boosts his value for what the MVP stands for. Most valuable player. At a time the Dodgers needed him to be the most valuable player, he ended up being the most valuable player. They needed him to play these different positions due to injuries. The roster just wasn't set up right. I mean, they would rather, obviously, who would you rather play in shortstop, Miguel Rojas or Mookie Betts if you could? And then they did. Yeah, that's not a knock against Rojas, but Mookie Betts, man, he's one of the best players in baseball. If he says, if they go up to him and, hey, do you want to play shortstop? And he's like, sure. I mean, I'll do it. And then he plays it well. He plays it well. I think he only had, one or two errors at shortstop, and in 15 games, it seems like a lot. At second base, that's like his natural position, and he could win a Gold Glove at second base. There was a double play he turned with Kiki Hernandez the other day, and it looked like that they were freaking partners their entire career, like doing these types of double plays all year. And then he still plays Gold Glove defense in right, and it gives Dave Roberts and the Dodgers so much flexibility that he really is just an all-around team player. It's very selfless because a lot of these guys that they sign their long-term contracts are like, I'm the right fielder, I'm going to play right field every time I start. Mookie Betts is like, I want to have fun. And I liked it when I played, when I would be like, all right, I'll start the game here, I'll go move here. It's a different game every day. And I think that's what Mookie Betts said. Like this season, it's just about having fun. It's the most fun he said he's had in his MLB career so far. And I think it's definitely shown on the field. And then speaking of oddities, there's only been one player to win the MVP in both leagues. And when you get a guy that is on the cusp of doing it, I think a lot of voters are going to be like, you know what? I'm going to vote for that guy because, he's close enough. He may even overtake him this month. But how cool would it be to have I voted for a guy that won an MVP in not only the American League at one point, but now I'm voting for the National League. And I think that's just something for MLB. Like when I looked at that stat, I forget who it was.
Yeah, I was trying to think.
But yeah, it's only happened once in the history of the MLB, and that's a long time. So that's something that could definitely benefit him. Like I said, it just depends on who these voters are because they all think weird. I mean, I think these votes should just be up to probably like the players, but the writers, they still are going to get the votes. But I think right now it's just a toss up. I really think after these, we're going to talk about the series next. I think after this series, and I definitely think after probably the middle of September, that the race will probably be either someone taking the lead because these two teams are both going to clinch soon. I think the Dodgers magic number is 16. The Braves is, I think, 12 or 14. Once you get to those clinch parties, you're trying to just get your body ready for October. So I don't know if one of the other guys may take a little bit of a chill pill and get ready for October. So it could be interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I like how you brought up like the difference in positions that Mookie played because I totally forgot about that. I wanted to talk about that. That's incredible. People don't understand the change in right field to second base and shortstop. It's incredible, and that's one of the things that could differentiate you in such a tight race. That and team success, which there's not much difference there. They're both teams are the top teams in the NL. But yeah, I agree with you. I think halfway through September, once these races start, once they start getting their spots, things like that, you're not going to see as much of trying. I wouldn't say trying, but like you're not going to be going hard. You're not going to be out there doing all this extra stuff, trying to win an MVP. I don't know. I agree with you. I think it's between Mookie and Acuna. But honestly, man, you said it. You don't never know what these writers are looking for. If Freddie hits 345 and hits 60 doubles, man, he's got a pretty good case. Like you said, 60 doubles hasn't been done since the 30s. 345 is like 4 points lower than what Luis Arraez is hitting right now, who hit 400 for like the first half of the year. It's open. it's open. This last month could be really big. But you're going to talk about the Braves Dodgers series. It's basically Braves Dodgers for who's going to win MVP.
Yeah. And like you said, pivoting to the series that's for this Labor Day weekend, what better way to kick off the holiday than having the two best teams, arguably in the National League, play each other? And I don't think it's going to be one of those series where each team kind of takes like a laid back approach where they're like, you know what, it really doesn't matter. It does matter to the players. Not only are you getting to see a team that you're so familiar with in recent playoffs, and like at the end of the day, the perfect scenario for these two teams is that whatever happened last year doesn't happen again. They both were humiliated last year. They both lost in the first round. Each team won over 100 games. They're both on pace to win over 100 games yet again. What happened last year can't happen again for either of these teams. And that's going to be a chip on their shoulder for both of them. I've already seen it with the Dodgers. I seen this team and how it was built, and I didn't really think they were going to win over 100 games. I thought they were going to make the playoffs, sure, but I didn't think they were going to play this well. And then the Braves, I said at the beginning of the year that they were probably the best overall team in the MLB. And they've shown that. They've just been so deep offensively, defensively. Their pitching staff's a kind of weakness, I would say. The bullpen's a little bit better than the Dodgers, but their pitching staff, similar situations with injuries compared to LA. But, seeing these two teams battle, it's going to tell a lot because, you can't say, all right, whoever wins this series would definitely win a potential playoff matchup because that just isn't true because there's going to be some guys on the roster that aren't there right now that could be there in October. They could just be taking data from these games and then trying to pitch them differently if they meet again. So it's definitely a big series. LA is only separated by the Braves by 4 games. It's a 4-game series. Even if you split it or take 3, that puts you within like 2 or 1 games. And that's with a month left to play. And the Dodgers have a pretty favorable schedule in the month of September. They play the Giants that like twice. I think that's like probably their hardest series that they'll probably play. So realistically, the idea the Dodgers finish with the number 1 seed isn't dead. Do I want it to happen? I don't really care. I saw on Twitter, I agree with this one Dodgers fan that I usually go back and forth with. I don't want the number 1 seed because I don't want to play either San Francisco or Philadelphia or the Diamondbacks if that's what that wild card winner is going to be. I feel like a team like the Phillies would give the Dodgers more fits than the Brewers. And I get that the Brewers have good starting pitching, but that lineup's pretty vulnerable, even though they have been hot recently. So I still want to see probably a split this series, but that I feel like that's most realistic, especially with these two teams. I feel like both teams would be happy with the split. But, I'm not too sure. These two teams I wrote earlier, they've been the powerhouse in the National League. Probably, the Braves have been doing it forever. They may have missed. I think I wrote in there that they missed like the playoffs since 2013, like a couple years. But if you go back like the 20-year history of things, the Braves have missed it like a handful of times, and the Dodgers on that hand as well have only had a record under 500 twice. So, they used to play in the same division too. These teams are literally so interconnected, whether it's it's more behind the scenes wise, but now we're starting to see players like Freddie and Olsen, like they're swapping teams. It's just crazy to see. I'm interested to see what your thoughts and like, do you want these two teams to just beat each other up and then maybe a couple guys get hurt and then the Phillies stroll into Atlanta and then do what they did last year?
That's gonna happen either way, so it doesn't matter. But no, I think what you said is it's really big. I think it's more of a matchup thing. I think it's learning from these games. You even saw it. I'm gonna keep bringing up the Phillies because I know the most about the Phillies. Last year we played the Astros in the last series before we went to the playoffs, And one thing that worked really well was Connor Brogdon versus Jordan Alvarez. He would throw him that changeup in on his hands, and he'd swing over top. So you say, hey, let's learn from this and use it down the line, which we didn't do. We put in Jose Alvarado, and we know how that went. But that's something that you could learn from these games. The Braves and Dodgers, they both know they're the best teams in the NL. I don't see any way around that. The thing, but like you said, at this point, it's almost a rivalry, dude. Like these teams have been so good for so long. It's like a franchise rivalry more than like a division rivalry or thing. I think they're going to play their hearts out. You're going to see these guys, go for it, but it's not going to be. You never know how the pitching's going to line up, who's going to need a day off, something like that. You can't really look at it as a preview, but it's going to be fun, man. I'm excited to watch it.
Yeah, it's definitely a rivalry. I was going to touch on that in my my article that I wrote.
Yeah.
I mean, these teams have met each other so many times in the playoffs. Like I said, they used to play in the same division, weirdly enough. They used to be a team in the National League West. And just recent history, they met in the 2013 NLDS, the 2018 NLDS, the 2020 NLCS, 2021 NLCS, and then just playing, all right, if you're going to say the top two seeds in the NL are likely to meet in the NLCS, if you were a betting man, that's not a bad bet to take. So if they meet again, that's like 6 matchups in the span of 10 years. Like that's a lot. Like as this Dodgers history of success, they've been in the playoffs 10 straight years since 2013. And you're telling me 6 of those years they've matched up against the Braves. That's not a fluke to be had. So it's definitely going to be an interesting series. A lot of good arms are going against each other. They're going to be in the playoffs. You got Max Fried, Charlie Morton, Bobby Miller, Lance Lynn, all these guys. The only one that's not going to be there is a Kershaw start. It looks like they're skipping his start, pushing everybody back in the rotation. But yeah, it's going to be a series.
Yeah, man. I don't think Kershaw needs to see the Braves anymore, and I don't think the Braves really need to see Kershaw anymore. They've seen each other enough over the years. But yeah, man, it's going to be fun. It looks like we have some good pitching matchups. The pitching is going to be the biggest question mark, I think, for me. Like you said, the Braves pitching could be really good, or it could be really mid. You never know. The Dodgers they have a few different starters. They always find out, some random guy that'll come out there and pitch, like Tony Gonsolin coming out of nowhere last year and being God for half the year. But, things like that. I think it'll be exciting, but the Braves are going to lose to the Phillies anyway, so it doesn't matter.
All righty. Well, that about does it for this episode of ClubCast. Definitely talked about a lot of stuff here today, especially pivoting back to the National League. But, we'll definitely be back here same time next week, hopefully. Other than that, anything else from you, or are you out?
Go Phils.
Yeah, there you go. Right as I see Acuna hit the grand slam off of Lance Lynn. So we're ending the episode now. All right, we're out of here. All right, bye.
See you.